Hello and welcome back. Thanks for joining me. My name is Berit and today I want to talk about the books that I've read so far this year. I've read 8 books in total until now, and I just thought I'd walk you through chronologically and tell you a bit about what the books were about and what I liked and what I didn't like about them. So the first book I read this year was This House is Mine by Dörte Hansen. Since I'm a German potato, I read it in German, and the title there is Altes Land, which would translate to Old Country. That's a region near Hamburg. The story is about 2 women, Vera and Anne. Vera came to Germany from East Prussia in 1945 when she was about 5 years old, together with her mother. And they escaped from East Prussia at the end of the World War because they are Germans. And they end up living in that region near Hamburg. And Anne is Vera's niece, who comes to live with Vera after Anne found her husband cheating on her. And so she takes their little son and goes to Vera. And the book is about the relationship of the 2 women and how they both try to find their place in life, or how they never really find their place in life because they both feel like they are refugees all the time and they never really settle down at a place. This was a very strong start into the year. The book is very well written, exceptionally well written, I would say, and the characters are complex and understandable and funny at places, and at other places it's very moving. The plot doesn't have too much action, but it's mostly an observation of the region and of the people from the region, and especially, of course, of the 2 main characters. The one we get to know better and who I found more interesting was Vera, because she comes across as a very distant and cold-hearted person, but you understand why she is the way she is, which is really interesting. And I would absolutely recommend this book to read. It was intriguing, it was beautiful, it was a strong start into the year. Then I read Havana Blue by Leonardo Padura. I read this as part of a reading challenge from my local library, where they have a literary world trip, and each month has assigned a city and you are challenged to read 1 book that takes place in that city, and the first one was Havana. This novel follows the police investigator Mario Conde, who is assigned to find a missing person from a Cuban ministry, and that is a guy who Mario Conde went to school with. So his search for that person also takes him back into his own past and the past of Havana. I didn't care too much for this book because it's a crime that follows a police investigator. That's usually not my thing, but I wanted to give the genre a new try. I didn't care for the plot. I didn't find it interesting. The resolution was very foreseeable, I think. I didn't like the main character. He's a shady policeman, and that's kind of the point, but I didn't like that because the kind of shady behavior that he sports was not my thing. I also didn't care for the description of women in the book, which might just be my taste, I don't know. But let's say I won't reread this book, and it's also the first book in a series, and I probably won't read the series. Sorry about that. After that, I finished reading Dune, which I read together with a friend. This is a very big, huge science fiction epic. It's about the planet Arrakis, also known as Dune. The Duke Leto Atreides has just taken over stewardship of the planet, and the protagonist of the story is Leto's son Paul. Because of something that happens, which I don't want to spoil, he and his mother come to live with the native people of Dune, who are called the Fremen. And I'm going to be honest, I had a rough start with this book. If I hadn't read it with a friend, I might have quit pretty early. The first 50 pages or so, I had problems getting into the story. I had problems getting into the language. I had problems getting into the world building. And I had just problems to understand what was happening. But I'm very glad that I pushed through, because I ended up loving this book. And I think it is worth the work that I have to do to understand this book, because the language is really sophisticated, at least for me. I mean, English is not my first language. The world building here is exceptional, I think. The planet itself is such an intriguing entity, and how the people live on and with this planet is just so fascinating. Also, I mean, the planet Dune, maybe for some context, it consists of desert pretty much, but they have a substance there, the spice, which is also called melange, which makes interstellar travel possible, and which also prolongs life. And therefore this planet is highly valuable, although it is so inhospitable. The planet itself, I think, was almost the most interesting thing for me. I also liked Paul very much. He's a very complex character, I think, and I like his development. And the language is very distanced, but I still felt that I rooted very much for certain characters, although I didn't feel the same emotional connection to them as I would hope to feel maybe. But I think that's part of the story, because as you read it and as you get the bigger context, you really get to understand that this is but one story of what is happening in this vast universe, which is very interesting again. But I would understand if people had problems with the writing style maybe, or with the fact that the language is kind of complicated, I think. I mean, I have to read this very slowly. This is not a book I could read in bed before sleeping, because I had to concentrate too much. But yes, as I said, after my rough start, I ended up absolutely loving this book. And I would absolutely recommend reading it, especially since I kind of hope that at the end of this year maybe the new movie will come out. Then I read The Song of Achilles, which I don't think I have to say much about because it's been all over the internet. It's the story of Achilles as told by his companion Patroclus, and it's told as a love story. And this is very approachable even if you don't know any Greek mythology. And I have to say, I loved this book. It made me cry, it ripped my heart out, and I loved it. I actually don't know if I like Patroclus that much, but seeing Achilles through his eyes was fantastic. It was beautiful. And I did, after reading this, I did read the one negative review that I could find, which was from the New York Times. They wrote something like, it has the head of a YA novel, the body of the Iliad, and the hind legs of a Barbara Cartland novel. And I get the point. I would say it's not wrong, but I would say it works for me. Because for one thing, they are teenagers for most of the book. For another thing, it's based on the Iliad, so duh. And for the third thing, I think that the Barbara Cartland-ish things in there are well written, and for me, they fit into the story. I really loved it, but I have the feeling that apart from the review of the New York Times, probably everyone else loved it too. Afterwards, I read Circe, also by Madeline Miller. I don't think I have to say too much about the book, because I think there are also a lot of people who have discussed that. It's about Circe, the main character, daughter of the Titan and sun god Helios. She's a nymph. She discovers witchcraft, and because the Olympians are really scared by that, she gets exiled to the island of Ayaya, where she learns to accept herself and find inner strength. And I found the book okay. I think the language was beautiful for the most part, but some expressions and sentences here and there kind of threw me off. I also felt kind of like a who is who of Greek mythology here and there, which I didn't care for. I also thought that this would be feminist in a way that I would get the feminism, I guess, because most of her story evolves around her relationships with men, which is understandable because the source text is male-centered. But even when there are several women in the story, it still revolves kind of around Circe's relationship with men, which I didn't find the most interesting part here. I did like the episode where Circe's niece Medea comes for a visit. That's because I like Medea, not only in this book, but like generally the character of Medea in Greek mythology. I like her. I find her story interesting and intriguing and complex, and I don't know what it says about me that I like Medea, because she slaughters her own children to get revenge on her husband. And I also like the last third of the book because of one character who appears in the last third, and everyone who read the book knows exactly who I mean. After that, I read Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. Sorry, I mispronounced that horribly. This was my book for the stop number 2, Tokyo, and it was also a recommendation from a friend. And this book is about a woman who finds her life's purpose as an employee of a 24/7 convenience store. And this was thought-provoking and really interesting and kind of funny. It's a very short book, and I think it would be a great weekend read. And I think it can start discussions about our society, because the main character doesn't fit into society. She doesn't get why people act and talk the way they do, and she also constantly thinks about why people find her strange and her behavior and her thoughts. It's kind of a dissection of society and of some of the absurdities in society, and I felt like it held a mirror up to ourselves. I mean, it's about a Japanese society, of course, but to a degree that's very applicable to society in general, I think. And I think the book was funny in places. It was almost satirical, and it really got me thinking about society and how we work and how our communication works. And I would absolutely recommend this book to anyone. Then I read Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno-Garcia, which is a Gothic horror novel set in 1950s Mexico. Our protagonist is Noemi, and she travels to her cousin Catalina to check up on her because she received a very disturbing letter from Catalina where she suspects her new husband Virgil to be planning to murder her. And so Noemi travels there to check up on Catalina, and she lives in that big-ass Gothic mansion in the middle of nowhere in the Mexican mountains. And as Noemi tries to find out what's happened and what's happening, scary things unfold in the mansion. This was a very good book. I found it really atmospheric, and I liked the solution very much. I won't say anything more about it because that would be a major spoiler, but I thought that was unexpected and interesting. And I found that it was creepy in places, the book. I read it late at night, and I was in bed, and I read like an episode where Noemi has this weird vision slash nightmare in the bathtub, and something in my flat made like a noise, and I was so scared that someone was standing in the doorway, which was impossible because I'm living alone, but boy was I scared. It was really good. I also don't remember when I last read a haunted house story or a horror story in general, so I might have rediscovered my passion for that. And the last book I read was The Vampire Armand by Anne Rice. This is a spin-off of the Vampire Chronicles series from her. The Vampire Armand basically tells his life story. He is a vampire who also appears in the Interview with the Vampire. In the movie he's played by Antonio Banderas. And yeah, Armand is originally from Kiev, and he lived originally at the end of the 15th century, and he gets kidnapped and ends up as like a 12-year-old boy, I think, in a brothel in Venice, where he gets bought slash freed by the strange Marius, and they enter in a kind of problematic relationship which has an erotic side to it. And when Armand is about 16, 17, he almost dies from an injury and then gets turned into a vampire by Marius, so he won't die. And then he takes you through his life from circa 1500 to like the 1990s. And half of the book takes place in Venice. Therefore, I count this book as stop number 3 on my literary world trip, because that was Venice. I liked the book quite a bit. I also liked the erotic side of it, but only because I managed to repress the problematic things in that relationship. I had to actively repress it by telling myself, he's played by Antonio Banderas, and that is a grown man. So that was my repression strategy. The last third or quarter of the book is a bit weak, I think, because it has a very summarizing character. And I didn't love that, but I really liked the first half or 2/3 that take place mostly in Venice. But the last third or quarter is a bit, yeah, it's summarizing. You also have the summary of like another book from the Vampire Chronicles, which I haven't read. So that might be one of the reasons why I didn't care too much for that part of the book. But overall, I think it was nice. I hadn't read a vampire story in quite a while, and I do want to read more of the Vampire Chronicles now, because I would like to have more context of what I read. Also because my best friend told me that there is another one in the series that is about Marius as a main character, and I am a fan of Marius, even though Armand is like 16 and he is like 1500. But yeah, I would recommend this book, but I would also say don't be like me. Read other parts of the Chronicles first before you read that one. At least the first two, I'd say, without knowing what they're about. But I think you should have a bit more knowledge of the things that happen, that get referenced in the book, but they don't get explained, because if you have read the other books, then you know what they're talking about, and I didn't. And that kind of, especially in the beginning and then towards the end, I think that might have influenced my not liking the last part so much. But yeah, that was all. That were the 8 books I read. I hope you enjoyed my rambling. If you made it this far, thank you again for watching, and maybe I'll see you in the next video. Bye.